So, Erin, in your role as a mental performance coach, you work with a ton of jiu-jitsu athletes. And what are the three most common issues that you deal with and the questions that you get asked in that area?
I'd say mostly competition related anxiety, but I would separate it into a few different things. I'd say perfectionism comes up a lot, actually. I've had a lot of people with arousal issues where they get too hyped up or not hyped up enough. More in the somatic, the body aspect, like the tingly fingers or the butterflies, and then self talk and having a lot of negative self-talk. Perfectionism can impact both of those, but just because you have those doesn't mean you have perfectionism. But I find that especially in the adults who want to do well and do well by their instructors, do well by their coaches and training partners and friends and family and whoever is there to support them. So I would say overarching competition anxiety, but the three things would be perfectionism, poor self-talk, and arousal management issues.
Yeah, it's it's funny because I don't think the majority of jiu-jitsu people compete, but I think once you start competing, you get so invested in it that you are now willing to go and do the weight training, do the cardio, spend the money doing the extra drilling and traveling to open mats and
Yeah.
consulting professionals in various areas. That would include, physiotherapists to heal injuries and people to help you with your upstairs game as well, which would be you. It seems like once people start competing, so much of their self worth gets invested in that they're willing to pull out all the stops to try and win, even though it's just some silly regional tournament for a little piece of plastic mounted on a little bit of plywood.
Right, right. It's very hard for people to go out there and do the thing, so to speak. I think it's really difficult to put yourself out there and be vulnerable, especially when jujitsu is hard and there is a huge chance that you could get injured or that you will have, feel embarrassment. And so there's a lot of prep that you could do mentally to avoid going out there and thinking that you have to demonstrate your ability instead of developing your ability. I think that's a really good switch for a lot of people.
But isn't a tournament about demonstrating your ability? I understand that being in the training mat in the dojo, that's developing ability. Would you
Mhm.
argue that a competition is also about developing ability?
I think it's viewpoint, right? So a lot of times anxiety comes from the importance of an event. And a lot of people assume, there's this kind of tier or ranking of different opportunities that you can have to compete. You can have your local Fuji or Naga, right? And people kind of put that on the lower totem pole. And then you have maybe grappling industries, you've got jiu-jitsu world league, you've got some other ones that are, a little bit, I guess, bigger. They do like the world or they do other
Mm.
things. And then there's IBJJF and then there's ADCC. IBJJF is usually scary because it's very rigid, and I always joke there's just ref in suits, a ref in a suit, and that's what
Mm.
makes it seem more important, or you're paying more, or it's more on time, or people assume that the caliber is higher, and you might look at that as like, okay, more sacrifice, more money, more time, more dedication. And then you have ADCC, which is more like, yeah, it's obviously submission grappling, and it's a lot more dangerous because you could potentially be rolling on concrete, and so it's more of a wild kind of way of like maybe a higher risk of injury versus IBJJF is more about self presentation. Right, like you have to have the perfect gi, you have to have the right measurements, you have to have your patches in the right way, and people get that heat pressed and they whereas ADCC is more like, we don't give a shit what you wear, you can wear a speedo, you can wear a cape, you can wear whatever you want, you can wear a gi, you can wear a belt, right? So it's there's different ways that people will be nervous about it, but if you look at it as data collection, and I'm working with people who are not looking to be black belt world champions most of the time that I'm working with. And so a lot of it is they have full-time jobs, they have kids, they
Mm.
have other domains, which is key to making sure that your self-worth doesn't get so involved in your performances. Because that's what happened to me. When I was 20, I found jiu-jitsu. I started competing 3 months in and was like, wow, I never had anything that I could put all my energy towards being. And then I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was almost a blue belt, or I think I was a blue belt. So for me, it was, wow, I found somewhere that I could put all this passion into. And then when I went to go compete and I saw, cool, like if you're good at jiu-jitsu, not only do people want to know you and want to train with you, but you can feel really cool. And I just wanted to be really cool. And so obviously I trained under Hamala Bahal, Cobrinha, and Marcelo Garcia. So in the beginning, when I was with Hamala, I'd walk around tournaments and people would be like, oh, can I get a photo? And I'd be the one taking the photo for them. And I'm like, holy shit, this guy's pretty popular. This is really cool. And that's when I got into journalism, realizing that people wanted to know what Hamala was eating for breakfast. People wanted to know what Hamala was doing for his workouts, and then trying to emulate that and do the same thing. So I had access to this information that I could share to other people. And then that kind of started with, okay, now I have other domains. So at least when I'm competing, I'm also doing journalism, and I'm also, doing something and giving back to the community. So I've always tried to kind of separate it. But of course, when you get up into the higher belts and then you start podiuming at worlds and the majors, and now you have these expectations. Not only are there expectations of others, like, well, obviously if she won Europeans, she's going to do well at Pans and Worlds, right? And that just wasn't the case. I won Europeans and then lost my first match at Pans, lost my first match at Worlds, at brown belt. So I learned a lot through trial and error, but in that moment of, well, I don't really know who I am or what I want to be, that was hard, right? Because I threw everything. Now, the people that I mostly work with are people who have kids, or they're a mom or a dad, or, they have a side business, or, relationships and everything else that is really important for balance. But back then, especially ADHD, I didn't want to hear about balance. That was all or nothing. So that's kind of where I become an accountability partner for people as well, where I let them know, like, look, I know this is where your goal is. I know this is where your focus is, but is this serving you? I mean, that goes back to, when you tell yourself that in the middle of a role, is that actually serving you? Is that actually producing a good, appropriate behavior that's going to get you out of the situation you're in? Or is it going to make it worse? Things like that.
So when you say serving you, that could mean a couple of different things. If your sole and only goal in life is to, I don't know, win the world championships, serving you would mean moving you closer towards the world championships.
Mm-hmm.
If you have other goals, then, or if you're interested, I don't know, being a healthy and balanced human being, then serving you would mean other things. Some of the most driven and high performance athletes that I've ever met were clearly not balanced and were clearly haunted
Mm-hmm.
by demons,
Yes.
and were not at all mentally healthy people. But it did help in one case the jiu-jitsu, in another case the elite level rugby performance. High performers are not normal people.
Correct. Yeah. To be elite, you have to be a bit neurotic. You got to do things differently. You have to be exceptional, right? But unfortunately, it's not sustainable. What's interesting is that there was a study done where they asked people, Olympians, that if they could sacrifice a certain number of years, I don't remember, off of their life in pursuit of achieving that goal of the gold, Olympic gold, would they do that? Would they make that trade? And all of them said yes.
Yeah.
And so that is where,
And I was once party to a bunch of university academics saying if they could take that same drug that took 10 years off their life, but it made them 20% smarter, would they do it? And they also all said yes.
wow. So what does that mean? The pursuit of greatness, right? Is it, but what is the motivation? Is it current, or is it more legend status?
How do you mean?
Is it, I want to be, I want to reap the rewards right now in this life, even if it means that I'll have less time with it, with that new skill, with that glory? Or is it about creating a legacy that exists beyond your life? And so what I tend to think about is, if you're looking at an artist, for example, right? Sometimes the artist's work doesn't become valuable or known until, post-mortem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if that is a relationship with thinking, okay, well, as long as I leave my legacy, as long as I make a difference, as long as I make an impact, or my name was, written in stone for some sort of record, I made a difference, then I'm okay with not living as long. That's kind of how I picture that. But what brings it in is sustainability. Because what athletes don't do is, and this is really interesting also, there was a study I did in my grad school program, my master's program, that was about the abuse that retired Canadian female athletes experience after the fact, because they don't really understand what they're in until they're out of it. So usually there's a transition period, whether it's being forced out of sport due to aging out or to injury, or just, you know, you're like, it's time. Getting out of that experience makes you look at it differently and realize there was a lot of abuse involved. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
when people are in it, that's a
Well,
different
there's no
story.
shortage of martial arts analogies of people thinking, well, this is just how senseis or professors or masters behave. They're eccentric like that. Of
Hmm.
course, they want you to massage their shoulders when they're in a hot tub or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
This is
That
just normal behavior in this space. And you're saying that this is not just limited to martial arts and jiu-jitsu. This is also a,
well, authority, yes.
yeah.
Right. Like authority is a huge one of hierarchy that we have, which is pretty toxic. But the amount of people who don't think of what's going to happen after, right? Like when
Mm.
I was in my 20s and I'm playing Spider Guard every day, I'm like, how we get arthritis? This is so cool. I used to post, I remember one time I posted a picture of my hand that was all, messed up and fucked up from whatever, Spider Guard over the years. And I got like so many likes on it and shares. I like blew
Yeah,
up because of my hand. Yeah.
awesome.
It's a badge of honor, right? The
Well,
cauliflower ear.
if you look at my knuckles, you can still see that the first two knuckles on every finger are pretty swollen, and that's from punching cinder block walls when I was 12 because I wanted to be like those kung fu masters who could
There you
split
go.
rocks. I never thought, hey, one day I'm going to be 40. One day I'm going to be 50. And I'm still
Yes.
going to need to type, and I'm still going to need to brush my teeth.
Exactly. We don't think about that.
Yeah.
And especially, there's positive deviance in terms of the cultural norms that will bring someone to do things that are morally or ethically wrong in order to produce a good performance, right? So,
What do you mean positive deviance?
positive deviance would be going against your values or going
Mm,
against maybe your morals in pursuit of a specific goal, meaning PEDs, cheating,
mm.
those little like strategic ways that you can try to like I remember watching one time a blue belt who I'd competed against, who was well known. She became a black belt world champion. Maybe this is why, but she, back in the day when the reaping was like, oh my God, you never reap. The girl was in single leg X. She passed it over, trapped it, and went ref. Just little things of trying to get ahead, even though it doesn't make you a good person and it doesn't maybe reflect who you are as a person, a whole person or off the mats. But that competitive spirit being like, win at all costs,
Mm.
and that's what drives people. So when I work with my clients who aren't necessarily highest level, then I have to let them know that it's okay to fail, which I would say this to an elite person as well. You're going to. How many times have you heard the greatest in the world say, I don't know, you had a better day than me, right? Like, how do you show up every single time consistently without knowing what your opponent is going to do, no matter how many times you fought them, right? Because jiu-jitsu is so complex and dynamic. And so I help these people kind of have a better, bigger 30,000 foot view perspective
Mm.
that says, yes, this can be really meaningful and this can be really important to you, but it is not your everything. And when I do decide, and I've worked with professional surfers before too, as well, professional longboarder. And I've had to do the same. She's sponsored. She was on the world tour for WSL. And she had to constantly remind herself, I like surfing. I like
Mm.
surfing, right? Like I actually do enjoy it. And my performances don't make me a good or bad human. They're actually separated.
But it does have major implications. If she does terrible in 3 competitions in a row, her sponsors disappear. Bye
Mm-hmm.
bye sponsors, bye bye lifestyle. Hello, Walmart greeter position. It the amount of
Slippery slope.
yeah, it's no wonder people put so much stress on themselves. And
Yeah.
even if you're a recreational competitor, you may know, hey, there's more to my life than this. But with all of your friends watching and your coach watching, and you thinking that you're not
Mm-hmm.
only representing your own honor, but the honor of the school, the honor of your instructor, and the honor of jiu-jitsu in general, you're I know the triune brain theory has been debunked, but your reptilian brain thinks it's about to fight for its life.
Yes.
And so you referred to it earlier, the level of arousal can go sky high, even though you probably don't perform best at a 10 out of 10 level of arousal in
Hmm.
jiu-jitsu.
Right. Arousal. So we have an inverted U theory. It started with drive theory that said the more arousal, the better the performance. And then they were like, well, that doesn't seem to work out too well. It's actually more of a spectrum that you can be too little aroused and too much aroused. And so it depends on the skill, whether it's open or closed. It depends on if it's a self-paced move or timed
What
team
do you mean open or
sports.
closed?
Open or closed. Open would be where you don't necessarily know the outcome, like an open skill, right? Like being able to volley with someone. You don't actually know where the ball is going to come back.
Hmm.
But a closed skill, like a putt for golf,
Or
right?
darts or something.
Or darts, right?
Hmm.
Something that the difference between a basketball, right? Like the actual movement of the game versus a free throw, right?
Now, something like darts, I'm assuming that your level of arousal, if you go on a 10-point scale, should be pretty low. It should probably be at a 1 or a 2. But if you're doing a deadlift, which is still a closed pattern, a deadlift is always going to be the same. Your level of arousal should probably, for most people, be, I'm guessing, an 8, 9, or an 11.
So we usually use a scale that is from, well, it depends. There's an arousal measurement scale by Burton and Radecki, and it goes from 1 to 9. So 1, they consider comatose. You
Mm-hmm.
are practically asleep, right? Like those guys that will be in the stands waiting for their open weight matches, and they're just asleep. And then you have the 9, which is frenzied, out of your mind, almost like a panic attack, I guess. Like you don't really function too well unless you're being chased by woolly mammoths. Then it would be different. So ideally, this is where the individual zone of optimal functioning by Yuri Hannon came in and said, well, actually, it's different for every person. It's everybody has their individual zone, but it's still going to be within that parameter, probably like a 5, between a 4 and a 6, and depending on the skill, right? So, and then you might look at the skills. Okay, well, if I'm doing scrambles and I'm doing takedowns and I'm doing like the stand up portion of the match in the beginning, that's going to take a lot of energy. It's going to take a lot of vigilance. I'm going to have to be, I call that spidey senses, right? I'm going to have to be vigilant. But if I'm too vigilant and the person changes their level and I sprawl, now they've got me in a headlock and it's not where I want to be because I overreacted. Versus if I didn't react at all, I'm just like, yeah, whatever, man. And then boom, he's in on a double. And I'm like, well, I like close guard, right? So if you're playing a certain type of game, then you want to actually pursue that, but also be reactive to a sense of, what your opponent is giving you. And that's that complex transaction that's happening. But if I'm now maybe in top half and I'm feeling pretty good, I'm up 10-0, my arousal is going to be a lot less, especially if my goal right there is more to maintain and cook them or pressure them. Right. So it does take different arousals. Plus, your arousal affects your focus. It affects your self-talk. It affects your mood. It affects your emotions. So being able to know where you thrive and knowing that there will be unpleasant emotions and sensations that are facilitative. So if you feel like you're going to puke every time you go to compete, but like you still perform well, that's part of it. It's unfortunate. I think there was a certain basketball player that would go and puke before every game. And he's like, yeah, do I want to puke? No. But do I know it's going to be a good game then? Hell yeah. It means I'm on.
It almost
So
became his shibboleth of being ready.
yeah, exactly. Like his switch, right? And mine was, I mean, I have these horror stories of me. There was a live stream during COVID for like submissions on the shore. I was sitting on the toilet. They're playing my walkout song. And I'm like, wow, I'm shit my brains out. This is awesome. They played my thing all the way through. I was with my husband, but he was my boyfriend at the time for like maybe 2 months. And he's just like in awe because like Hafa Menda is there, Leticia Barrow, all these people. And they're asking, hey, where's Erin? I saw you were with her. And he's like, she's on the toilet. So that was my thing. And I had a friend back in the day tell me, this is the bad stuff getting out of your body. It's your body getting rid of the stuff it doesn't need. And if you go back to the woolly mammoth times, then yeah, taking a dump before you got to run for your life, like probably a solid decision that your body just sort of knows and it's wired that way for fight or flight.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
unfortunately, my I got fight or flight or diarrhea, right?
I like that you talked about how individual it is. And I think ultimately for dialing it in, I don't think you're ever going to dial it in correctly in your first 10 competitions. I when I was competing more, uh, as opposed to zero right now, it really
Yeah.
took a while to get it right. I would be too aroused, like I'd be too fight or
How'd
flight.
you know?
I don't feel. I think I gassed too
Mm.
fast, and then I went the other way, and I saw footage of I think it was Marcelo Garcia having a nap, or some Japanese MMA fighters going and lying down in the middle of the ring as if they were having a nap right before
Huh.
their. It was their flex, right?
Like
Their it.
Zen.
Yeah, and I tried that, and I found it. I wasn't aggressive enough. I was too like, hey, we're just rolling, we're
Whatever,
just flowing.
man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hey, flow with the go, man. And
Yeah.
it didn't work either, because I could have finished matches that I could have finished.
Hmm.
And so it took a while, and it was really only when I was competing a lot, and not only in jiu-jitsu, I was also doing the Firefighter Combat Challenge and other
Wow.
events that were televised in front of your friends, where I finally hit that smooth spot. So how do people get to that faster? Because it was a long, slow, painful process to find the optimal level of arousal for me.
Yeah. Trial and error, I think is one of the best
No, no,
because
I
of
want
the
an easy answer. I want
in
an easy
training.
answer.
In training, jujitsu people are obviously kinesthetic learners, right? We don't know whether we've got it if we just watch it or if we see someone else do it or if we feel it on us. We got to try it. We got to
Mhm.
try it and we got to figure it out. And we got to be in it, and then we can figure out if we're good at it or not, or if we can get better at it. Um, with arousal, it is a lot of mindfulness. So we increase mindfulness by saying, okay, how about we start some sentences with I'm noticing. I'm noticing. And that way we have a non judgmental awareness or observation of ourselves. And this can be used to highlight self talk. So I'll do self talk logs, I'll do arousal logs, we'll do emotion logs, we'll do effort logs, we'll do logs in terms of what is the pattern that is showing up in terms of whatever we're trying to measure. So, what thoughts are coming up, and what is the trigger or what is the situation that is causing it? And how are you reacting to it? Okay, we noticed that every time you're on bottom mount, you start your heart rate elevates, your breathing elevates, right? So we need to look into that. We see those patterns. Arousal would be the same. So what spikes your arousal? It would be figuring out, okay, when I'm in bad positions, then my arousal peaks because then I got to try harder because maybe I need to fight back before the position gets worse. Um, or I notice that when I'm really chill, I can think better, but my body doesn't do what I want it to do.
Hmm.
Or some people are like, yeah, when I just go, 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 I feel more of that flow and I feel more of that instead of the cognitive or associative stages, the more autonomous, meaning I could do it while talking to you. I could, do some freaking leg drags right now, just not even having to think about it. And so being able to know where you are your best, where you're not, is just that mindfulness. And then also working on values. This is something that isn't just directly related to arousal, but what happens with arousal is when we start putting too much importance on things, then the keyword perceived, what we believe or what we see, is going to affect the amount of importance and therefore like the amount of don't fuck this up, right? Don't fuck this up. Just don't get submitted. Just don't, right? That kind of scarcity mindset comes in. And so the importance of the event as well as perceived control. So there's a lot of things we can't control. A lot. We can't control, whether the gi is going to pass, whether the practice skill is going to match the actual skill, what time our match is going to go, whether our first opponent is going to show up, whether we're going to get, have to wait 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes mat side. There's a lot of things. But the perceived control says, what can I do with that time? What can I think? What can I say to myself? What can I listen to? What can I focus on? What kind of games can I play? Who can I talk to? So it's thinking about what we can do within those parameters. And then that's what gives people that perceived control that says, oh, well, if I can kind of control what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling, and I can get to know where I'm feeling best based on the emotions and the arousal and whatnot, then I can just develop a routine that allows me to say, oh, I know I want to be about a 5 when I'm warming up. And if I get into like a 7, I'll have some relaxation techniques. I'll stop sparring my warm up, or I'll stop doing this, and I'll go and I'll listen to a progressive muscle relaxation if I need to really calm down, or I'll go have a conversation with a confidant, or I'll read some mantras, or listen to a song. There's certain things that will bring it down, versus if you're waiting 7 hours for your absolute to start and you're like, holy shit, I'm a featherweight and I've got a super heavyweight my first match. I can't necessarily go in there being like, let's see what happens. I got to go in there like on. So how do I get there? Right. And then
So how did you manipulate these factors when you were competing in
that's,
both
yeah.
MMA and in jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard because and so the first thing you would do is say trait versus state anxiety. So state anxiety being the situation itself that is producing that type of anxiety, versus you're just someone who's anxious. And I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when I was 19. So that's kind of like, I run high. I'm anxious. Someone doesn't answer my text. I'm like, well, they died. They're in a trench somewhere, right? Like, I'll just be able to visualize those awful things. So when I'm focused on doing my best, a lot of times it was not the right thing, because I would be thinking about the importance and I wouldn't be thinking about my values. I was thinking about the likes that I was going to get on Instagram. I was thinking about like how I was going to pose on the podium. I was thinking about like, well, I just don't get submitted, right? Like, oh, you lost to this girl. You're probably going to lose to her again, but at least try to make it better this time. Or try to make it spectator friendly, so then people don't really care whether you won or lost. Or if you don't win this first match, who's a nobody, she's just a bracket filler. No, elitist shit. Then your whole camp was useless, right? So like, I had a lot of factors and influences, and I didn't know who to choose and what to choose. So I didn't have my values and I didn't have my ethics. That's what I have now, which I incorporate into my clients' lives and their routines and their mindsets. But at the time, I didn't have an anchor that said, this is you need to do it your way.
I guess so that when you were going through all this, I guess you hadn't gone and done the studying yet at university to become a sports and performance psychology. You're not a psychologist, so
Consultant. Yes.
okay. But you
It's a lengthy
okay.
title.
Let me. So when you were going through all this, you didn't have the training yet in your sports and psychology education that you went to university for, and you hadn't gone and got the certification. So you were blundering around in this state of generalized anxiety, heightened by what is an undoubtedly anxious, anxiety-inducing sport.
Yes, as a female in a male-dominated sport.
Fun
In
times.
a
Why
Yeah,
did you do it?
oh, that would take like a whole episode of like psychodynamics of like my childhood.
Mm.
Um, but I always gravitated towards the male dominated stuff. Like, I was in the hardcore scene, music scene, like mosh pits and stage diving and
Mm.
head walking. Yeah, so cool. And I just always wanted to be like cool and tough. And then I would like roughhouse the guys, and then the guys that I would go to shows with started jiu-jitsu, and so that was,
Mm.
I felt comfortable with them, and so I was the only female. For a long time. And I would try to like seek out, like, I would drive 3 hours in traffic on a Friday night from LA to Irvine to go to Gracie Baja headquarters, just so I could take a female only, jujitsu class when I was a blue belt. So I was just like full on. I'd work full time all day, and then I would just drive down there. And I don't really know how I did it or why, but um, I was very, very driven, because I'm very, I like authenticity. I've always march to the beat of my own drum kind of thing. And I think that's just neurodivergence in general. And then I found that there's a lot of neurodivergence in jujitsu, because
I wanted to get to that. I'm glad you got
yes,
there.
similar to comedy, right? Like,
Mm.
comedy people, I always joke that like, I just love finding careers that make no money. So I thought comedy would be like the next one, but like being able to have, I guess, like being able to focus on what I was good at. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was good at, and I didn't trust what I was good at. Didn't have a lot of self-belief, self-efficacy, self-esteem. And so trauma, capital T trauma kind of thing. So a lot of people, we gravitate towards each other. And maybe it's the lack of hugs when we were children. I don't really know. I would love to do research on it. I would love to find out why or how many neurodivergent people really are diagnosed and undiagnosed.
So in this sport, I'm sure there's a ton of ADHD people. I mean, I'm probably undiagnosed, but when I take a look at how I behaved when I was young, uh, thank God for some reason reading managed to tick that box of stimulation for me.
Mm.
Otherwise, I would have been kicked out of school for sure. The teachers just figured out it was easier to leave me with a book and leave me at the side of the room because if I wasn't doing that, then all hell would break loose. So fortunately, I found a way to channel it, control it. But that seeking of that, I would, whether or not it's ADHD, certainly the sensation seeking behavior and the
Dopamine.
stimulus uh, seeking behavior is very, very, very common in jiu-jitsu. I mean, the the looking for intense emotions, intense sensations, uh, those intense battles that you have even on the training mat. We're not even talking about competition yet, but competition just be an amped up form of that. I bet ADHD is through the roof in this sport.
Absolutely. I think that people who are kinesthetic learners, trial and error type of learners, people who like to think outside of the box, have autonomy, a lot of autonomy, a lot of creativity. There's a lot of, well, this is the way we do things, but like you're still going to have to figure it out for your body. Um, and the instant feedback. I'm not even going to say instant gratification because we know that the first 3 years or whatever is not very much gratification. It's more suffering than anything. But I would say that knowing, like, okay, when I do this move, I find out real fucking fast whether it worked or not. Right? Like, oh, I'm gonna try this underhook. Oh, Troy bar, you know, or like, cool, I got a double leg triangle. So it's instant feedback that's immediate. That's like, oh, well, I'm gonna do that, or I'm not gonna do that. So it's very much it's self learning in a way. It's a lot of fucking around and finding out, as Steve Kwan likes to say as well, or BJJ mental models. So I think when you have this need, I guess, need for like dopamine and stimulus, and an outlet that will let you move, right? Because a lot of us are either internally or externally restless. And then also having the support system of people who, whether they like you as a person or not, they still want you to be there so they can try to beat you up.
Yeah.
That sort of belonging, right? And then finding out that you're good at something and getting that first stripe and being rewarded for something. And you could do weird jujitsu and still be good at jujitsu. And so I think when people are able to come and find their weird, I think that is the portion that keeps people really involved for a long time.
Neither you nor I are psychologists, and even if we were, we shouldn't be diagnosing people from afar. But after ADHD, what would you guess the next most common DSM diagnosis would be if you did a broad spectrum in the sport? I think there's more than the average amount of autism or people on the spectrum in the sport. I, I,
Yeah.
I would
Yes.
suspect that that's true.
Absolutely. I think I'm beginning to think that I have a therapist, and she's kind of like, yeah, you could be also on the spectrum. So that would be a mixed diagnosis of ADHD, and autism.
Mm.
Um, it feels like a pull, right? So I can be the dumbest person in the world and do the stupidest, impulsive, weird shit just for the fun of it. And then I can also be very analytical and very like, but wait, what would happen if we did that, right? Very rigid. I need impulsivity and spontaneity, but I also need routine. And so sometimes I'm like, wow, I just need to put my head down and just do the thing. Like that was what I always tried to do. I always tried to honor that part of myself where Cobrinha would be like, okay, you're gonna compete. Well, you better train, right? It was always like, you got to train, you got to be consistent. And so I'd say, yeah. I'll just fuck the feelings, man. Fuck the emotions. I'll just go train. And then I was like, but wait, I feel so many things. Like I feel like when someone says no to me, when I ask them to roll, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, like uh, it's it's not really like as easy as saying like, oh, they didn't want to roll with me. That's fine, and letting it just kind of flow over. I usually go, well, what did I say? What did I do? Maybe, do I smell? I'm
It's
constantly
not you,
thinking
it's
like,
me.
yeah. And then at the same time, like, I'm also like, yeah, girls, you should say no whenever you want to. You don't have to give an excuse, whatever. So there's like two sides of me that's like, speak up. And then the other side is like, but don't hurt my feelings. And then, with motivation is really hard. And what I've learned from a lot of ADHDers is that riding that wave is the most important part. It's not, and most people would say, well, that's not how the world works. You can't just wait for a spark to get the job done. But in a way, you have to work with yourself. And that is where I come in and I go, look, is this serving you? That's how I work with my clients is, you say that your value is joy, but yet you train 5 days a week because you told yourself that you needed to, and you're not having any fun. You're not enjoying yourself. And now you're not really learning because when you go in there, you're thinking like, oh, checking in again, like clock out, clock in. And then that's kind of like defeating the purpose. Now, if your joy was, or if your value was discipline, then it would be different. It would say, I find joy or gratitude or satisfaction or whatever from being disciplined. This feels good. Well, you could tell that someone who has their first priority of joy versus their first priority of discipline, those two people could both be world champion black belts. They can, but they can't be in environments that don't support what they value.
Would that have an effect on burnout? I'm assuming that people whose value is discipline, they're less likely to get burned out because by just doing it again, they may get injured, they may overtrain, but they're into that sense that burnout isn't going to be as noticeable because they're doing what they love.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas somebody who's doing it for joy, they may be more susceptible to burnout because all of a sudden they're like, I need to train 3 times a day or whatever the magic number is,
Mm-hmm.
8 days a week. And they can't sustain that.
Well, the person who has joy would probably go, I don't have to train 3 times a week. I get to train 3 times a week. Right. I love doing this. It is not a burden for me at all versus the person who is disciplined might ignore their signs of burnout. And so burnout is very, very, very common. And one of the myths that people have is that, well, you just take a break and you come back. But think about this. If you are leaving the environment that caused the burnout or the situation or, the social circle or whatever it was, the cause of it, and you leave and you feel better and you come back to the exact same situation, what the fuck do you think is going to happen again? Like this is the burnout cycle. And so what happens is we don't have seasons in jiu-jitsu. So when we go do, when I was on the circuit, so to say, right, we did Europeans, which is in January, and then we did Pans in March, and I probably did a city open, like I think it was either like New York or Boston or something in between there. And then after that was Abu Dhabi in April. And then some people would actually take that was like a week apart. They'd come back and then they'd go straight to Brasileiros. I never got to do Brasileiros because of being in Abu Dhabi. And then we would do Worlds in June, probably something in between there. And then during the summer, there'd be a little bit of a depression, to be honest. I called it the post-Worlds blues, which a lot of people feel, whether you win or lose. It's like, man, everybody, all the camaraderie, you're working towards something, and then it's just over, kind of like after the Olympics, but obviously at a lesser scale because it's every year. And then, in the summer, there's plenty. There's Chicago Summer Open, like New York Summer Open. There's, all the IBJJFs and everything else. And then there's the Nogi season. Let's say you're an ADCC athlete, or you do the trials also in March or whatever it is. So like, there's just no real off season. And so it can be very hard for people to organize their own trainings, especially with the pressure of, yeah, but I don't want to sit out on this one. Or everybody else is going, or my professor said if I win this one, I get my brown belt, or I don't know, whatever it is, or whatever the ranking points that you're chasing, or whatever the external motivators are. And that's okay to have external motivators, but the values and the intrinsic motivation, that type of regulation is so much more sustainable, reliable I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying go do your values and then seek joy. It's really not that easy, right? Because we don't get to control our environments. Going back to the hierarchy, if you're a white belt, like I've had white belt clients who really hired me for skill for skill acquisition. So, and they'd be like, please, I want you to teach me about ecological dynamics, you know? And I'm like, cool, we can, but good luck trying to tell your instructor, hey, I think we should try this. Fuck yours, you know, that you've been doing for 20 years. I want to do this new shit. So, or, you know, a lot of times, let's say it's a purple belt and they're not getting their needs met. There's a conversation that needs to happen. But the fact that they're a purple belt, they have to speak to the black belt a certain way. And especially there's a difference between off the mat in an office, you know, as student coach, right? Or like student or membership versus owner, versus student. So like, that's why you'll find that there's a separation usually with the one that teaches and the one that collects the money, right? Because it makes it very hard to want to help this person knowing that like they owe you $300. Like it's very hard to do the business aspect with it. But the traditional aspect of jiu-jitsu with the hierarchy that I believe comes from deep down, like fascism of superiority and inferiority. When I'm a blue belt and I look down that way, down the rank, you know, if we line up traditionally in a line, I got to beat those white belts. If those white belts beat me, then I am an embarrassment. I don't deserve to be a blue belt. And if I go against the purple, brown, black belts and I win, they obviously were giving it to me. I'm not that good, right? Like they must have had a bad day. So it creates these rigid belief systems in this hierarchy. And also it creates a problem for a lot of people in terms of psychological safety to say, hey, I'm not getting my needs met. And some people will say, you know, you're a paying member, therefore your needs should be met. But mix that with the tradition of jiu-jitsu and you're a lower belt speaking to a higher belt about how they should teach, you know, or what they could be doing better. It's a conversation that you have to tread very lightly because there will be met with a lot of resistance.
Yeah. It's certainly, there's so many directions that we could go in here. Certainly, I think the rigid hierarchy in jiu-jitsu is a problem. It's one of the reasons why I don't like people calling me professor. I don't like
Same.
people calling me master, or you know, I like what Pritt Mickelson says. It's either call me God or nothing. Call me God or Pritt. Just they're reducing it to the absurd.
Yes.
Uh, because certainly in the last few years, there's no shortage of examples of people who are really, really, really good at jiu-jitsu, who really, really, really suck at everything else, from basic science to ethics 101 to compassion 101. And we have this innate human tendency that if somebody is up the hierarchy from us, that we're going to assume that they're competent at everything. And you know, you should not be getting you wouldn't take financial advice from your car mechanic, hopefully. Why are we taking uh, you know,
Marriage
advice,
advice.
marriage advice, or cosmological advice, or shape
Yeah.
of the earth advice from our jiu-jitsu instructors?
It's intense because I have been on both sides. So when I was a white belt, I was enamored by my professors because they were something. They were already multiple time world champions. They were driven. They're a different breed, right? And I likened it to like a rat race because they would win something and then be like, yeah, cool, I did it. And then be like, what's the next? What's the next? What's the next? Like, I just need the next thing, a next thing. It's all external, right? And I think that watching those highs and lows, you know, from right there. I mean, I was around when Hamilo, his knee was injured by Tarsus, when Tarsus went for that knee bar from the turtle position. I think it was like 2009 or 2010. And then I was around when Hoffa armbarred Cobrinha at Pans. I think it was like 2000, I don't know, 13, 12? Something like that. And then with Marcelo, I mean, I was around Marcelo when he had his twins and went through the death of his son. And just really, really hard things to go
when,
through.
when these people were being human.
They were being human, right? But at the same time, I felt like they had superhuman strength. And I don't know if that's because of the facade, like that tough facade. But I mean, we've seen Marcelo cry, you know, like he's a crier, he's an emotional guy, but they're just different, like built different, right?
Mhm.
And so I was obsessed with the champion mindset, I called it. I actually had a website back in like 2010, and I was going to do a whole book, and just see like, what is it? I've always been fascinated by the psychology of it. And because this is an unregulated sport, so when I saw Rafa Mendes do, I think it was a jiu-jitsu, I think it was jiu-jitsu style. He did the cover photo, and he tried to pose just like Michael Jordan with his rings, the
Mhm.
same like black suit, sofa chair. And then,
Mhm.
you open the magazine and he's just like, what up, like just like showing off his rings that no one made but him. And then the IBJJF made rings for World
Mhm.
Championship and Hall of Famers. But I thought it was like, no one cares. Like, zoom out, buddy. Like, you are one of the greatest to ever do it
Mhm.
in jiu-jitsu. Phenomenal. But like, nobody knows who you are outside of jiu-jitsu, right? Like, this is an unregulated sport. When kids are homeschooled, right? I have an 8-year-old client, and she's not homeschooled, but she's dedicated a lot of time to her competitions in both gi and no gi. She's been to a lot of different gyms, but there's no call. Like, first of all, this is a myth, one of the myths in terms of just sport in general, that parents who dedicate and make their child very specific in their approach to sports will get them to the pros. Like, things will pay off in terms of a college scholarship, but like 3%
Yeah.
of people go to like the
Sometimes
pros.
sometimes they do, but
Very small
it's a
percentage that it,
it's a survivor bias. We focus on the people who did, not
yes.
the 97, 98% who didn't.
Right. And there's many reasons. Whether, I mean, a lot of it's probably just going to be burnout. A lot of it is going to be lack of motivation. It's
Shitty dumb luck for injuries.
right. Bad environments, negative environments, bad social support. Like, there's so many reasons. Like, it's called the great sport myth, that if you put your child into sports, they will automatically reap these amazing benefits of getting along with people and being hireable and coachable and all these like desirable traits that make them great, in society. But if with jujitsu, first of all, my 8-year-old client can't get a blue belt until 8 years, 16, right? According to like IBJJF. Can she be like the Helena Kravar, where she goes and does super fights? Yeah, sure, fine. But there's still going to be a limit because of her age. Now, she's done probably 3 or 4 years of jujitsu already. How do you keep a kid motivated from 8 to 16? Think about all those changes that are going to go through
Yeah.
her life. So, positive youth development framework says to sample, right? Sample. Let that kid try a bunch of different things and
Mhm.
support them in that, right? And
That's not
also,
that's not bad career advice either. Like if people are struggling for a career, it's how many different things can you taste? How many different little random experiences can you put yourself into to see what sticks?
exactly, trial and error,
Yeah.
right? That experiential learning. And with parents in jujitsu, it's like there's no scholarship, there's no high school, jujitsu. That's why sometimes they'll go into wrestling, but there's no real incentive because there's still rampant abuse, even what we consider borderline abusive coaching behaviors, so that it's
What
not
is an
getting into
abusive coaching behavior? What would you define as that? And give me some
be
examples.
it could be anywhere from verbal beratement to neglect to stonewalling to gaslighting to like something that's subtle. For example, is, let's say a gym has a bunch of medals on the wall, but you don't get your medal hung up unless it's a major or it's a gold. What does that say? It says that your efforts are not valid unless the outcome that you can't entirely control, is, that outcome becomes true. So you're putting these people in a situation where they feel that they are not valued unless they meet an external standard that is not always within their control or their reach. And then you could be, especially at the big gyms, I always say, like, you get lost. If you're not the one winning or, doing instructionals and being the star, it's very hard to get the right attention. And so you find attention from other assistant coaches or training partners or, outside sources in terms of instructionals, or even, with BJJ mental models, they have the actual, like, you send in your tape and they review it and stuff like that. So a lot of self-motivated education. And so when you don't have a lot of attention becomes the currency, right? You want your instructor to say, good job. You want your instructor to say, yeah, dude, that berimbolo was sick, right? Like, you need that feedback. But unfortunately, we don't really get that. So you do have to rely on your training partners. You do have to rely on other sources like mindfulness and self-talk logs and arousal logs, and collecting that type of data in a systematic way that allows you to grow based on the patterns that you see. But it's hard to have that attention. I do have some clients that are from smaller towns they have coaches that fly with them to go to competitions and whatnot. And it's amazing. And I have to tell them, like, this is something that is way more important than just simply being at a good gym and having, tough people to roll with.
Yeah. Uh, you've mentioned burnout a couple of times now, and we've come up against that. Have you experienced burnout? What is it, and how do you recover from it?
So being, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, say the whole thing. It is a common thing for me to get burnt out by just basic life tasks that become overwhelming if I don't have the motivation to do them. One of those being cooking myself food, hence the reason why I get a lot of these protein drinks, because it's the easiest thing for me to grab. Otherwise, I open my fridge and I'm like, these are just ingredients. And I don't really like cooking. So for a while, I was spending a bunch of money on meals so that I could just pop it in the microwave and feed myself. But those basic types of tasks that give me no satisfaction are really hard. And so just life in general is hard. Now, burnout for me always happens when I wasn't getting my needs met, but I didn't really know what my needs are. And if you go with self-determination theory, then it tells you there's 3 basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy being like, okay, I get to choose sometimes when I want to wake up. I get to choose if I'm going to go into training and not feel consequences for it, not feel guilt or shame for not being there. I get to say, what I choose to do in my roles. It's not just specific training, right? Like, there's some variability in and I have the chance to do that on my own, or self-drilling, whatever, self-studying. Then there's competence, which this is a big one. And so when you have your coach come around and say, hey, that was a sick berimbolo, that grows your competence, which in turn builds your self-efficacy that says, okay, I'm good at that. I could do that. I have times that I've done it before. I've been told I'm good at it now. I've gotten the reassurance. And this could be something as small as your partner being like, that was a really tight guillotine, right? That's like really good feedback to go, okay, cool. Now I know I'm good at something. And I have people that it's called learned helplessness, where you feel that no matter what you do, you just can't do anything. You can't make an impact. And so what I'll do with those people is I'll say, look, if you can say be in reverse de la Hiva and you can kick your foot up and make them post, you are making an impact. If you can push someone away or break a grip, that is making an impact, right? So even something as small as that can show competency, and that you're not just some pawn and that you're waiting for things to happen to you. The last thing is relatedness. And relatedness is that belonging, which makes it really, really hard. You could say in general, if you are a member at a gym, then of course, you are a member. You are part of a crew. But we all know that there's cliques. We all know that there's different types of relationships, and we have to zoom out a little bit and go, we're rolling around and sharing sweat and just getting up all in each other's faces, to strangers, basically. So you do have to have a level of trust that says, yeah, if I fart on you, like, I'm sorry, man. Like, that's just how it goes. Or like when I go hard with you, like, don't take it as I'm going personal, just try to match my energy. Or there's a lot of little different confrontations that can happen. And so what I think in terms of relatedness is that making sure that you know your needs and that you are actually verbalizing your needs, whether it's with your training partner or it's with your coaches or your assistant coaches or, the owner of the gym, just being more direct, because we always assume that slap and bump means the same thing for each person. you know, I say it's consent, but you never really know. Or you go to the guy that's like, oh man, I got like a hurt elbow. I don't want to go that hard. And then all of a sudden they're just like, you know,
That's
they're,
never happened in jiu-jitsu.
so
The
it's getting
possum
along,
axe murderer arc
right?
never happens.
Yes, getting along with people is really, really hard, especially for people like neurodivergent people who have social issues,
Mm.
like that don't necessarily just pick up on things like. And so things need to be more direct. So if you feel like you belong, you feel like you're good at something, and you feel like you have a say, and you make an impact, then those are your needs being met, and you're less likely to experience burnout. And also just knowing about burnout and knowing how you individually feel what burnout is, because burnout could be decision fatigue, it can be compassion fatigue, it could be physical exhaustion, it could be I don't care about my sport anymore, it could be I'm avoiding my sport because I feel like the more I do it, the more I'm going to be bad at it, or whatever, like all of these self-fulfilling prophecies. So it gets a little complicated and it's very personalized. But burnout in general is when you feel like you are no longer into what you were into before, I guess would be the best way.
So, given that you've outlined aspects of burnout, including things like autonomy and connectedness to the other people, you called it relatedness, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Yep.
Maybe your burnout, maybe curing burnout isn't a question of taking a break, like you said. Maybe it's a question of changing your environment to one where you've got autonomy and one where you can feel connectedness. Maybe the gym that you grew up in has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your needs have changed, and maybe the way to cure overtraining is to take a break and then maybe reevaluate your training and build in
Reevaluate.
build in breaks and rests and change up the work to rest ratio. Maybe the way to cure burnout is often to change gyms or to change your environment.
Definitely possible. Now, do people have multiple access to different gyms?
Depends where they live.
Depends where they live. I lived in LA.
Yeah.
The first gym I found was like 15 minutes from my work, which was already about a half hour from my house. When I moved to Cobrinhas, I would drive 4 freeways, 36 miles through a Hollywood. That was a sacrifice I had to make, knowing that if I was going to train twice that day, I'd have to leave my house at 7 and I wouldn't get home till 11. And I'd be at the gym all day because driving back and forth would be ridiculous because of LA traffic. But at the same time, you go to New York, right? Henzo's and Marcelo's, 3 blocks away from each other, right? So it depends on whether you're in a big city. There's also, I mean, Creonch isn't really a thing as much anymore. I don't really
Mm-hmm.
hear about that, like being the trader. It's more back in the day. It was more so
Yeah.
this traditionalism of like, I pour all this stuff into you, and then you are now my apprentice, and you have to do everything I say. And if you don't, if you have your own mind and you want to go open your own gym, then that means that you are an ungrateful prick. Um, that's not really the case now because there's a age of information, right?
Yeah.
So it's more so like sometimes, okay, so sometimes you can change the whole environment, sometimes you can change a relationship
Yep.
by having a conversation, sometimes you can ask for different accommodations, you can ask or change your training dates. You can make suggestions. If you're a higher belt, you can offer to teach or open the gym for a certain amount of time, and say, okay, guys, we're going to do open drilling or we're going to do an extra open mat. You can go to different open mats and gyms. You can do camps. You can
Yeah.
do, right? Like there's so many different options to see out. But if your instructor or other people create shame or guilt for you for doing these things, then it can hinder their ability to even enjoy what they're doing anymore.
Yeah.
Because now it feels like they're being untrue to their instructor or whatever.
I suppose you can change your environment by moving to a new environment, or if you have either an understanding instructor or power within the gym, like
Mm-hmm.
you're a brown belt running classes, you can change your actual environment. One option for people who live in small towns and may not have access to that many gyms is starting your own training group. It's so popular now that if you have a garage,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a 18-foot by 18-foot area that you mat out that two people can roll in, maybe four people if you don't do takedowns and don't have people standing, that's an opportunity now that was much harder to actualize 10, 20 years ago. But you don't need to train at a school to get pretty damn sorry, you don't need to train at a school very often to get pretty damn good now. There are, if you use the right training methods and you incorporate the right drills and games and sparring and have a partner who's willing to uh, explore other ways of training as opposed to just rolling, and then every once in a while you go calibrate your skills by going to doing that 4 hour road trip to go train at the
Mm-hmm.
school in the next town over, you can get pretty good. So that is kind of the nuclear option if you're just sick and tired of, if you're burnt out from dealing with the bullshit of your instructor or the senior clique of students or whatever. uh,
Yeah.
I bet you know it's something I'd actually like to explore supporting somehow in the future. I haven't figured out how to do it, but
There's so many opportunities for people to find their people.
hmm,
I think when you there's something about starting, there's something about being the leader that other people will normally follow suit. An example, and I don't have like a scientific like theory to back it. I'm sure there's some sort of like contagion theory or something, but like one day I didn't feel like training and I went into like one of the beginner classes and stuff and I just grabbed a barbell. We don't have like a gym or anything. We have some stuff on the side and I decided to do some lifts, some cleans, whatever, deadlifts. And then two other people came over and were like, "Can I just like get in a couple reps, you know?" And I was like, "Yeah, dude, like give her, you know?" And he's like, "Yeah, I wouldn't have done this otherwise. But, 10 reps here and there, right? Like it's still something." And then when when my husband started a training group, on Friday nights, it was like, "Guys, I want to be more competition oriented. So I'm going to start running more like this competition style open mat." Of course, you said competition at a non competition school and people are like, "Oh my God, I'm going to get beat up. I can't show up." We changed the name to just like Friday no-gi, open mat. And now we have people from competitors from all over and it's a competitive yet fun vibe. And we go to pho every Friday night after,
mm-hmm.
and it's become this routine and this camaraderie. And I've even made jokes that we'll start putting like a whiteboard and make tallies of how many submissions we get and make it actually competitive because we've created a group where it's like, go hard and we're not going to think anything differently of you. These are all safe people that we feel safe training with, that like when we tap they're going to let go, and vice versa. And so I think when you create what you want, then ideally other people who are even semi interested, give them the tools, give them a DVD to watch, give them a match to watch, give them the opportunity to say, "Hey, if you
Mm-hmm.
show up at this time, I will show you a move that you can get better at," or we can do drills together, or we could do ecological approach, games, constraint-based games. We could do, right? Like I have clients that do this all the time and I encourage it because there isn't enough opportunity for people to find their needs. There's a lot of, because of the hierarchy, there's actually a place I haven't been yet, but it's called the Coop or the Co-op. It's in LA somewhere.
Oh
It's
yes,
like,
I've heard of this.
yes. And every time I go back home to LA, I'm like, I'm going to do it. And then I'm like, I don't really want to drive all the way to like downtown LA. So I'm not going to do that. But eventually I will. Where no, it's not really like anyone's the lead instructor. You can get promoted by them if you want, but they're like, yeah, get promoted elsewhere. Just come here and train and learn and share your knowledge. And very communism like, and I'm into it.
It's funny you talked about the training group that then goes out for Vietnamese food afterwards. Before there was a jiu-jitsu instructor in my hometown, we were still all interested in the UFC, and there were a couple people who had gone and done $300 private sessions with some brown belt somewhere, and another guy had bought a few instructionals, and we were getting together, and then we'd always go out to this horrific all-you-can-eat buffet restaurant afterwards called Uncle Willie's. So we were the Uncle Willie's Grappling Association, and we were this close to getting patches made. Uh,
Oh my God.
I wish we had pulled the pin on patches. Are not that expensive. That would have been hilarious. It'd be one of my most valued uh, possessions now.
Yeah, Pho
But it,
Vietnam 3696, Thorold Stone Road in Niagara Falls. They know us. Every
yeah,
time we come in, they're like, okay, how
yeah,
many? Or, we thought you weren't going to come today. They're
yeah,
great. It's awesome.
yeah. So I mean, that's your. It speaks to the social needs that jiu-jitsu meets. You know, you hang out with your friends after trying to strangle them and break their arms.
Right. Exactly. You need to have that leveled approach. And a lot of the people in Niagara it's like a smaller town. I have a lot more friends here than I do in LA, even though I grew up in LA. And I think it feels like I'm in a sitcom sometimes. And I don't know if this is like the fact that they're Canadian. I don't
Mhm.
really know if it's like Letterkenny or like Trailer Park Boys, but there is a lot of
Wow!
similarities.
First guest ever to make a Letterkenny reference. I did an entire instructional with Rob Bernacki, and we
Uh,
included so many Letterkenny references in it,
Probably
right
just
right down to the branding, and it totally went over the head. I've actually been in the town that Letterkenny. It was based off of essentially the area around Elmira, Ontario, and there are Mennonites
I've been there, I
riding
think.
down the
Yeah,
road, and they're anyhow.
I've
We
heard
could
of that actually.
yeah. Letterkenny is a Canadian gem, eh?
A.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot small town in terms of like people just pop in rather than being like, "Hey, are you busy in 2 weeks on a Friday at 3?"
Yeah.
And penciling you in, and there's like not traffic, and like I could, yeah, it's definitely more camaraderie than I found when I was in LA at Hamelos, when I was in Hollywood area at Cobrinha's, Marcelo's had so many visitors. You'd be training with a person for like 2 months, and then they'll be like, "Okay, I'm gonna go back home to Switzerland," and you're like, "I had no idea. Thought you had moved here," you know. And just a lot of new, different faces. But the vibe now is these are people that I genuinely care about. Like I know about their families, I know about like their kids, and it's a very different approach. And like we have the ADCC Niagara coming up, which is literally down the street from me. I used to brag about having Worlds be an hour from me, and now I'm like, this is sick. It's literally almost walking distance. And like I'm trying to, we as in the gym of like the instructors have worked together to try to get more competitive people in and trying to get them to try competition at ADCC and create this whole mindset. And it's amazing that people who have never competed before will be willing to compete because they know that whether they win or lose, we still give a shit about them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they win or lose, or they try it out and have the worst time ever and don't choose not to do it ever again, that we are supportive of multiple goals and different values. Some people are just wanting to do the scary thing. Some people are wanting to get a gold and see that their training is paying off. Some people want to go in and just be like, I want my kids to see me do something cool. Or some people are like, I want to go be feral and try to fight someone and like not get arrested for it. Like, so be it. Everybody has their reasons, intentions, and motivations. But like when I have a smaller gym and it's not like the master, person telling everyone, what to do and how to act, it's a little bit more camaraderie and more psychological safety, I would say, because you're not afraid of being like, oh, I can't speak ill of this person, or I can't do that because if I say this, they might think that I'm speaking it up against them, and I'm just a purple belt, and the hierarchy and the tradition and whatnot.
So in our conversation, you're clearly informed by data and research and uh, sort of academia. What is exactly your academic background?
So I have a master's in sport and performance psychology from the University of Western States. I entered that program with the entire goal of being a CMPC, or a certified mental performance consultant under the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. So I could have gone into a clinical mental health program. I could have done a clinical mental health program plus the sport and performance psychology, but I didn't want to do the clinical aspect. It I spent a lot of time in the mental health area with Submit the Stigma, my charity, mental health charity that I started in 2016. But I realized that it didn't really get me up in the morning. I didn't want to work with eating disorders with athletes. I didn't want to work with bipolar or borderline. I didn't want to have to worry about diagnoses or suicide because to me, I'm a very sensitive person and it's a lot. It's a lot. And I think that's very, I don't know. I think part of me says like, you're a pussy, you know, like why don't you want to actually help people where it actually matters when they're in crisis and whatnot. And then, you know, I did EMT certification. I actually pursued firefighting before I tried this. And I remember being like, well, I can't get through the physical. And if I can't carry someone to safety and they die because of me, this is like my catastrophe theory, or like kind of catastrophizing going on, then I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And so I didn't want the burden of another person's psyche kind of like on me. So mental performance consulting kind of takes it from the stable. If you have stable mental health and or you are also working with a mental health professional in the clinical realm, then I am able to make you better, more efficient, more focused, more productive, more whatever it is. I can work with tactical, like military. I can work with first responders. I can work with CEOs or C-suite and corporate or mental wellness programs. I work with athletes, performing artists, dancers. I've worked with surfing. I've actually helped a guy pass the California bar exam.
Really?
So even academics. Yeah. So anytime someone is dealing with pressure and having to perform, all of my theories are based in counseling. So I actually took the core counseling classes in order to get my degree. So I did take a diagnosing class. I felt wrong. I'm like, who am I to diagnose? And it was really interesting to learn that whether someone meets the criteria, it doesn't mean that they should be diagnosed. If you came to me and you said, yeah, I have a hard time focusing on the right task. I'm not really motivated by, you know, routine things. I'm a dopamine seeker, whatever. You name all these things that would qualify for like ADHD. But if I decided that you being labeled ADHD, if that wouldn't serve you, then I wouldn't actually give you that diagnosis. And if you went to 3 different people, you might come up with 3 different diagnoses. So it's really interesting that, and it almost kind of like made it really hard for me to trust a lot of the clinical, because I'm like, well, anyone could just be like, yeah, it's this. I maybe didn't have generalized anxiety disorder. Maybe it was just the anxiety from being autistic and ADHD. So there's a lot of like more difficult realm, I guess, to work with.
Well,
So
psychology is a very soft science. I mean,
very, very subjective.
barely a science. I mean, I'm not saying it's not useful. There's lots of things that aren't sciences that are useful. But the fact that, as you point out, diagnoses can fluctuate day to day. Oh, we used to call all of these people bipolar, and now all of a sudden OCD is the flavor of the day.
Yep.
And you
Asperger's is
don't,
no longer a thing.
yeah. It and it's also not really predictive, right? I mean, that's one of the core tenets of hard sciences is there has to be a prediction. If I'm doing
Reliable.
physics, I have to be able to tell you if I drop this brick from 30,000 feet, it will be traveling this fast when it hits the ground. Now let's see if our predictions match our theory. If I grow up and I don't know, I get spanked 3 times a week, and I have a distant mother and a loving father who's with an alcoholic brother. None of this is true, but imagine that. What is my pathology going to be? And psychology can't make a hard prediction about it.
Nope.
So, whereas biology, I predict that if I put this toxin in my body, here's what's going to happen, right? You can test,
Biological reaction.
yeah. So I share your hesitation or your concerns about the whole diagnosis thing. Although diagnoses are sometimes very incredibly reassuring to people when they get them, like, oh,
Was for me. It
that's what's going on. Yeah.
was
So
validating.
when you got the ADHD diagnosis, that was
Absolutely. It was
good.
like I found my kind. I went back to
Okay.
report cards and I'm like, how did you not see it? You know, even though I think it was preschool asked me in private school, this was 94, I think, to get me tested for ADD. And my pediatrician told my mom that I was just smart.
Mm,
And, you know, who knew? 2 things could be true at the same time.
yeah.
But there's,
I
you know,
think
we like,
ADHD in some people is in many people is actually a superpower.
I
I
was
mean,
just
that's
about to say
yeah.
that. Yes, absolutely. I definitely think outside of the box. I'm more of an idea person. My analogies, like I make analogies usually to like movies and stuff. Like I make those analogies very easy and I can usually make them appropriate to the person I'm teaching. And obviously having multiple skills, multiple interests is really huge, because with the certified mental performance consultant, I can work with anybody all over the world. And like I said, I can work with multiple people, and it does not matter if I know the sport. Does it help? Yeah. But it actually helps for the client themselves to explain their domain from their point of view, and me get to know the sport. I could do my own independent research, of course, like I have with surfing and the bar exam and whatnot. But I go to the research, and there's nothing that says there is a female white 30-year-old surfer who is a longboarder on the professional tour. She's this, she's that, like, and that this is going to be the exact intervention that I can use. Just like in jiu-jitsu, I have to use adjacent. Sometimes there's not really much about wrestling. And if there is, it's like, okay, it's Turkish wrestling, or it's male Greco-Roman, or it's this. And so there's no proof. There is evidence, but I have to apply it, and it has to be tried. So there is no, this is the exact intervention and this works. I got chewed out by my mentor a few times because I would use like salesy stuff, and it'd be like, yeah, proven. She goes, don't ever use that word, because it's not proven. There's evidence for, but in our field, there's nothing proven. So my goal is to create some research that people can use to make informed decisions on coaching for jiu-jitsu, possibly getting it into more of a regulative area, whether that is creating an organization with ethics and an overseeing kind of organization that, who knows?
They're all, what would we name this? Would it have to be international? Would
It'd
it
be
be the Brazilian
national,
Jiu-Jitsu?
it'd be
IB?
international governing body. So it'd be it would be a nonprofit. IBJJF can't, because they're a for-profit.
Yeah. I was working up to come up with the acronym IBJJF.
Yes. There's something out there that could be it, and that is our North Star. That is our, how do we know what the rule set is? That's our, many people copy that rule set. All of their gi requirements, all of their illegal versus legal submissions, their reffing, their like everything, right? Like they were the first. They are the longest. We get it. But when you have a website that has an anti-doping policy on it, and it says that they are proponents for like athlete mental health, and yet do nothing for it, like there's a lot of claims and the mission statement and their values like being stated, but there is no action behind it. And so when you have a rape apologist who happens to be good at jiu-jitsu, and you keep promoting him, regardless of the fact that probably not a good fucking human, and it's just a good old boys club, like that doesn't serve the community. That doesn't help.
You're talking about Cyborg here?
Yes. And there are others,
Sure.
that have been accused. And there's just not been a good at jiu-jitsu, good human, like it does pay off in a way, but not necessarily, because the ones that are getting paid the highest are the trolls, and the ones that are doing a disservice to the jiu-jitsu community. But here we are.
God for Marcelo Garcia. That's all I can say. A decent human being who is also somewhat decent at jiu-jitsu. Greatest of all time.
I mean, it's hard, because that generation, I felt like I was a generation of the Americans that wanted to do what the Brazilians were doing, but the Brazilians had a different motivation. They were like, I'm trying to get out of Brazil. I'm trying to make a name and a life for myself. I'm trying to do this. And then you have people like me, middle-class white chick, who has her public, college paid for, but still struggling to figure out what she wants to do, and has a lot of different opportunities, but also wants to dedicate herself to a place that doesn't allow you to sleep there overnight, because that's actually illegal in the US. Like you couldn't just live the jiu-jitsu bum lifestyle, because I was living in LA, and even though I was living with my parents, I still had to like drive far and pay for my car insurance and have a side job and doing college and all these things. So it was like it's a different motivation of like that favela, like getting out of the favela and just being really good at jiu-jitsu because it's going to make you who you are kind of thing, versus wait, I went to Whole Foods 5 times this week because I need to cut weight, and now it's sitting on my credit card and I have to go get a Craigslist job later on to try to pay for it. You know, a little bit of different circumstances. I'm not trying to compare,
although
but
a lot, yes, there are jiu-jitsu world champions who've come out of the favela. There's also a lot of upper class, or like upper middle class and lower upper class Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belts who've won world championships. They don't tend to emphasize that, but when they talk about how their brother's an engineer and their father's a lawyer, and how exactly did they manage to do nothing but jiu-jitsu for 10 years? Like somebody was funding that. That's not an aspect that's often talked about. Maybe they wanted to make it to North America, fair, but it's not like every single one of them was struggling in the violence-ridden favela.
I've always been very transparent. And I remember that I felt like when I was having a following, when I was doing only competition and I was like, yeah, I'm in this country now and I'm making weight and I'm doing all these things, I wanted to be transparent. And when I was traveling the world, I was getting seminars somewhat to fulfill, the prices of the plane tickets and the accommodation and whatnot. I had 15 grand that I was given from my dad's life insurance. And I spent that on IBJJF. No, I spent that on just jiu-jitsu, like that travel and the lifestyle and everything else. So like, that's how I funded it.
IBJJF needed it more than you did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I needed IBJJF. Yeah. So at that time I was making a name for myself and I was just trying to, like live that jiu-jitsu world champion life. And I always had this idea that once I got a black belt world title that like life would be easy and I'm just going to coast and then I'll make it. And then I'll have some rich guy be like, hey, you want to open a gym? Like I'll fund it. And I'd be like, hell yeah, brother. So, and like that never happened. So it was, right? I thought like, well, when people are good at jiu-jitsu, it doesn't even matter if they're a good person. It doesn't matter what skills they have. And then here I am just hustling on the side. I worked for Gracie Mag. I worked for like, even before that was Budo Videos for a little bit. They paid me for interviews, to do interviews. I sold beanies and scarves to get to Portugal for Europeans. I tried I would do writing jobs. I would do just Craigslist jobs. A friend of mine had a company where he did like merch for bands. So I'd come over to his house and he'd pay me some cash to like, ship them out. Like I was just hustling as much as I could,
We're not even talking about the Only Feet account yet.
I have a wiki feed account, not by me. Someone else made it. And they even took stills from like my fight tips videos of me teaching jiu-jitsu, like stills. And I got like a mediocre review. So that's not really a place that I can go. I thought about it. I had a guy hit me up and I was interested. I was like, yeah, let's do this. Give me some money. I don't care. Just feet, they're there. But I don't have great feet for that. So, we're left
you gotta lean into it. Just tape each one of those bastards up and then apply some purple color just to get the really freaky feet going.
Or just make I bet you I could make a PB&J only with my feet. Like, I'm pretty sure I could do that. Like, it'd be very useful. I got really,
prehensile.
We're getting weird, yes.
Yeah, okay.
But I could definitely do that. But good thing now I am a certified mental performance consultant. With ethics and my own business. Yes.
So what does working with you look like and how do people do it?
So I've worked with athletes for over a year and a half now. I went through 400 mentorship hours and then a certification exam and everything else. So I've worked with a lot of different people. Now I work mostly with jiu-jitsu athletes. I'm branching out. I have since started working with kids. Like I said, I have an 8-year-old client. I have like a 15-year-old client. I've worked with a 12-year-old. I just had I think he's like 56. He just won Masters World and got his purple belt on the podium. Like I work with all kinds of people, mostly people who have jobs so they can afford me because I don't take insurance. So part of that is it is supplemental, right? But there is one-on-one sessions. I start with a assessment called the Athletic Coping Skills Inventory, or I use a psychological skills inventory just to gauge how you deal with pressure and what your current struggles are, and like how much do you know of goal setting and self-talk and arousal management. And then I might add like an athletic identity measurement scale to kind of see how much of your identity is in it. Because if you say you're a full-time mom, but yet people only see you as an athlete, there might be some disjunction there, disconnect. So I used one-on-one sessions on Zoom. And what I do is we go over the goals. We go over some psychoeducation, depending on what I think the intervention would be. I usually call it like a routes of administration. Sometimes it's a self-talk. Sometimes it's somatic. Sometimes we'll start with just mindfulness. Usually I start with values, and then we use those values as a compass to decide, like, are we headed in the right direction and the overarching direction? And then every session I have homework for that person. And it could be something, usually it's something in training and also something that they're logging or reflecting on. Or it's a pre-performance routine, or it's performance profiling, or it's the eyes off, or using the emotion wheel. So it's a lot of different actually counseling aspects. I use acceptance and commitment therapy mostly just because sport is hard. There's a lot of acceptance that you have to get over. Like you might get injured, you might get embarrassed, like I said in the beginning. And then working through that data collection. And it's the most fun portion of what we do when the person does their homework. So it takes someone who's committed. It takes someone who's willing to meet at, like, I usually do every other week. I don't necessarily set up programs because they have to be personalized and customized. I am going to start a group soon for Canadians. So I have about 3 to 4 people involved, like to have about 10. So I might put a call out for that. And then doing, $50 every Friday to do a discussion, to have everyone kind of bring their homework. And then I think it would be very, very validating to see that other people either have the same struggles or have similar issues, and then how they deal with it, and then sharing in on their resources. And then I also have an online course called Master the Pre-Match Routine, which is based on pre-performance routines.
Nice.
Yeah, I have that on Kajabi. So what it is, it's 4 different modules. So you start out with just like welcome message, the foundations of what a pre-performance routine is and the science. All of it has references and cited sources. I've made a 58-page workbook that has worksheets in there so that people, every lesson, you go through mental skills, imagery or visualization, the self-talk, arousal management, intentions versus expectations, values, and then you get into every phase. I have phase 0 through 5, from starting out, prepping your bag, to arriving at the venue, to changing into your gear, to getting warm up in, to getting to the bullpen, to getting mat side, to stepping on the mat. So there's certain things.
So that's for people who aren't happy with their mental performance.
It's for people who
in competition.
Well, most people aren't, right? Because most people are like, am I doing it right? Like, what do I do with my hands, kind of thing. And so because I've been in that scenario and I've also felt the things and I've been there, I know how to periodize each phase, so that, because there's a difference between getting to the venue and being in the bullpen. There's a difference between warming up and standing mat side, right? The things you say to yourself, the relaxation or hype up techniques. Like, you're not going to sit there and slap yourself when you first walk through the door, right? But you might slap yourself when you're standing mat side. So making sure that you're keeping aware of your arousal, so that if I were to be like, hey, what are you at right now? I know that you're walking around the venue. Well, I'm starting to get to a 4, but I'm trying to keep it at a 3. Okay, nice. All right, I just changed. I gave myself permission to be selfish. I put on my competitor hat. Now I'm able to say I'm a 5 and I'm ready to go warm up, right? Okay, how do I know I'm warmed up? How do I know I'm ready for the bullpen? And then, do I delegate? Do I walk back and forth between the warm-up area? Is there a warm-up area? Is there a bullpen? What am I going to do when I stand there waiting for my opponent to show up? What do I do if the other opponents are peacocking? Where do I look? Should I watch the matches? Should I watch my opponent? Should I actually take into account what the opponent just said about my next opponent? That's freaky.
That was somebody trying to come in here. Thanks, kids. Thanks, wife. Thanks. Fuck.
They're like, you should be done by now.
Sorry. Your opponent peacocking. Should you be watching them?
Should you watch your matches? Like if you have a bye, should you watch the match beforehand? I'm going to tell you, no, I don't give a fuck about your
Mm-hmm.
opponent. I care about what
Yeah.
you're good at and what you're going to do, and being in the present moment so that you're not thinking about that sweep that just happened. You're not thinking about the opponent you might face in the finals. You're not thinking about the pizza you're going to enjoy later. You're thinking about exactly the level changes of your opponent, what they're focused on, what you need, what the objective is in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, what the time is, the points, the strategy, the rule set. Like there's so much to take into consideration that I don't give a shit what my opponent is going to do. I fought the same person 4 times. The third time, we switched it up on each other. We literally, I went for a takedown and she went for a guard pull. And that we were, I was always the guard puller, she was always the wrestler. And so we both kind of went, like that Spider-Man meme.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like, whoa, I thought I knew you. And here we are, the third time that we fought like 4 different rule sets. And it just happened to be that we chose something different. So you really don't know. And you should never sit there and wait
Mm-hmm.
for if that person's going to, you just have to respond to what's in front of you.
And where do people find this course on mental preparation for competition?
Trainyourmind.com. So that's
Ya Mind.
Train Your Mind, YA.
Okay.
I have a quiz on there as well to see how mentally prepared you are. It's actually part of the quiz as well. So it's an evaluation feature. And it's based on a real assessment, rooted in research, has been validated. And so when you take it in the beginning, it'll ask you, like, do you have a routine? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have that? Probably not, because most people don't. By the end, you will have those. So I'm like, yes, they take the quiz afterwards. They're going to be like, look, I got my money's worth. It's a really great built-in for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Erin. I wish you the best of luck in running your school,
Thank you.
learning Canadian, picking up more Letterkenny references,
Yes.
and doing your coaching. It sounds like you're doing a really valuable service. And unlike a bunch of people who are doing coaching in this space, you actually have the certifications and credentials to do it. So
I
congratulations.
do. Thank you so much. It was not easy, but it's definitely worth it. And thank you for having me on and being able to talk about it.